Elon Musk asked about his wealth by a stranger. His answer leaves everyone shocked. But before starting the video, please let us know in the comments where you are watching this video from. The private jet had just landed at a secluded terminal in Austin, Texas. The sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting an orange hue across the sky, and the bustling sounds of the city seemed miles away. The sleek Gulfstream G700, a machine built for comfort, speed, and efficiency, had touched down with ease. Inside, Elon Musk sat, looking out the window, his mind still racing through thoughts of his latest ventures, SpaceX's Mars missions, the rollout of Tesla's next-generation electric car, and, of course, his recent ventures in the world of cryptocurrency. His black blazer, tailored to perfection, seemed to almost blend into his surroundings. There was nothing flamboyant about his appearance. Unlike the ostentatious displays of wealth most billionaires opted for, Musk preferred simplicity and function, whether it was in his clothes or his work. As he made his way toward the door of the jet, his mind was already thinking about the next steps in his business empire. The future. Always the future. Stepping out onto the tarmac, Musk was greeted by a small entourage, his assistants, bodyguards, and a couple of waiting reporters. The air was thick with the usual chatter of questions about his latest achievements. Tesla's recent market share increase, the launch of his new satellite internet initiative, and, of course, the ever-popular speculations about his plans for Mars. It wasn't often that Musk found himself in public places where people weren't bombarding him with questions. But today was different. He hadn't expected this kind of reception. No red carpet or grand gestures, just a small crowd of curious onlookers, a few fans wearing Tesla t-shirts, and an odd mix of journalists who had caught wind of his arrival. But then again, Musk had never been one for the spotlight in the conventional sense. As he began to walk toward his waiting Tesla Model X, the sleek black vehicle parked near the side, a man in a faded hoodie and jeans stepped forward. He was scruffy, disheveled, and looked like he hadn't had a proper meal in days. His eyes were wide with curiosity, almost as if he couldn't believe the moment that was unfolding. He was no typical fan or journalist. This was someone who was out of place, yet in the right place at the same time. The crowd fell into an uneasy silence. The man's boldness immediately caught their attention. This wasn't a fan trying to grab a selfie or a reporter hoping for a quick quote. This was someone who had something on his mind. "Hey, Elon," the man called out, his voice a bit shaky but not lacking in confidence. Musk stopped in his tracks. He could feel the shift in the air, the tension of everyone around him, waiting for him to respond. "You're the richest guy in the world, right?" the man asked, eyes wide with intrigue. For a moment, Musk didn't move. He simply stared at the stranger, assessing him with those piercing blue eyes that had captivated millions of people around the world. This wasn't a question that Musk was unaccustomed to. It was a question he had been asked countless times over the years. But this time, there was something different about it. The way it was phrased. The lack of reverence in the man's tone. The simple, raw curiosity that seemed to hang in the air. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some reporters raising their microphones in anticipation, others scrambling to get their phones out to record the moment. The stranger was still standing there, waiting for Musk to respond. Musk remained silent for a few more seconds, then gave a small nod, acknowledging the question. But instead of answering the way most people expected him to, deflecting the topic of his wealth or downplaying it, Musk took a different approach. "Yes, I am," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But wealth in itself is not something that matters much to me anymore. Not in the way most people think." The crowd collectively held its breath. This wasn't the answer they were expecting. The stranger, clearly taken aback by the response, stepped forward. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice now tinged with disbelief. The man was trying to piece together what Musk meant, but it was almost as if he was too stunned to fully comprehend the gravity of the moment. Musk took a step closer, his posture relaxed, yet there was a subtle authority in the way he carried himself. He glanced around at the small crowd, who were waiting for him to say something more. "Look," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight of wisdom. "Being wealthy, it's a means to an end. It's a tool. It's not the goal." The crowd was still silent, hanging onto his every word. Even the onlookers, who had initially been confused by the interaction, were now locked in a tense silence. Musk continued, "What matters to me is what I can do with it. The things I can build, the change I can create. A lot of people think that wealth is about hoarding money or living in luxury. But for me, it's about pushing the world forward. I could sit on billions of dollars, but I'd never make a real impact doing that." The stranger blinked, clearly processing what Musk was saying. "So, what's the point then?" "The point," Musk said, his voice softening just slightly, "is to leave something behind. To build the future. To get humanity to a place where we don't have to fight over resources. Where we don't have to wait for someone else to solve our problems. The point is to make sure my children, my grandchildren, and the future generations can look back and say that we didn't just sit around and enjoy our wealth, we used it to make the world a better place." The stranger, now wide-eyed, nodded slowly. It was as if he had never heard anything like this before. "You want to change the world?" Musk smiled faintly. "Exactly. The wealth comes and goes. But the ideas, the innovation, that lasts." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some people were nodding, as if suddenly understanding what Musk meant. Others were still skeptical, unsure if they could buy into this notion of wealth as a tool for global change. But there was something magnetic about his words, something that made them all believe, even if just for a moment, that it was possible. Musk turned toward his car, the crowd slowly dispersing as the exchange came to a natural end. The stranger, now deeply moved by the brief interaction, looked on as Musk got into the vehicle. And then, as the Tesla Model X drove off into the distance, the world was left with a question. Was wealth just about the money, or was it about something deeper, something more lasting? The quiet hum of the Tesla Model X filled the air as Elon Musk sat in the back seat, staring out at the blurred city streets of Austin. His mind, always a few steps ahead of everyone else, was already thinking about the next big challenge: SpaceX's Mars mission, the Tesla Cybertruck launch, and the global expansion of his solar energy company. But there was something about that encounter on the tarmac that stuck with him. The question had been simple: what does your wealth mean to you? But Musk knew that the answer would reverberate far beyond that moment. It wasn't just the question itself that was important. It was the fact that the stranger had been genuinely curious, his voice not laced with judgment, but instead with an earnest desire to understand. "What does it mean?" Musk had been asked 1,000,000 times, but this time it was different. The Tesla eased through the streets of downtown Austin, the towering buildings casting long shadows across the road. Musk's assistant, who was seated in the front, glanced at him in the rear-view mirror. "That was quite a moment back there, sir." The crowd's reaction was immediate. Musk didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon, his mind still mulling over his words. He had always been a man who saw the world differently, a man who believed in disruption, innovation, and doing things that others deemed impossible. But there was a deeper truth that drove him, a truth that went beyond the rockets and electric cars. It was the need to change the world in ways that would matter long after he was gone. Within hours of the exchange, the video went viral. Footage of Elon Musk's candid response to the stranger's question spread across social media like wildfire. News outlets picked it up, and it wasn't just the typical business-focused platforms or tech websites that were talking about it. The conversation had gone global. It was everywhere. The stranger, whose name turned out to be David Grant, had become an unexpected symbol. The man who asked Elon Musk about his wealth quickly became a trending topic on Twitter, with hashtags like #MuskAnswers, #ChangeTheWorld, and #WealthWithPurpose flooding timelines. David Grant had no idea what he was stepping into when he approached Musk. He had simply wanted to ask a question that had been gnawing at him for a while. He was a mechanic, a regular guy working long hours to make ends meet, and to him, the concept of wealth had always been about accumulation, the bigger house, the nicer car, the ability to buy things. But that day, standing face to face with Musk, he'd been struck by how Musk viewed wealth not as a destination but as a tool. Wealth should be about using it to help others, to leave a legacy, to change the course of humanity, Musk had said. Those words had hit David in a way he hadn't expected. He realized that wealth wasn't just about the money, it was about how you used it. The following days saw an explosion of media attention surrounding the encounter. Musk's comments were picked apart by financial analysts, philosophers, and politicians alike. Some hailed Musk as a visionary, a true disruptor who wasn't just building rockets to Mars but was also dismantling the traditional understanding of wealth. Others questioned his sincerity, wondering if his words were simply a public relations move designed to soften his billionaire image. But David Grant, the man who had asked the question, had become a media sensation. His life, which had been quiet and relatively unnoticed, was now under the microscope. David was contacted by news outlets, social media influencers, and even financial experts, all wanting to hear his thoughts. People wanted to know what he thought about Musk's words, whether he agreed or disagreed with them. He was inundated with interviews, but the one thing that struck him the most was how his simple question had sparked an entire conversation about wealth and purpose. "I just asked a question," David said in one of his first interviews. "I didn't expect all this. But honestly, Musk's answer made me think. Maybe it's not about just making money for myself. Maybe there's more to life than that." The conversation was everywhere. On news channels, in podcasts, and at dinner tables across the country. Elon Musk's words had sparked a shift in the way people thought about wealth, and it wasn't just wealthy people who were talking about it. It was the everyday workers, the students, the dreamers, people who had never once questioned the system that had been in place for generations. Musk's response had brought a new kind of clarity to a world that had long been fixated on accumulating wealth for its own sake. The idea that wealth should be a tool to solve problems, to make life better for others, to create something lasting, this was the conversation Musk had sparked, and it was powerful. In the days that followed, Elon Musk found himself fielding more questions, but not the usual questions about his companies or his ventures. Instead, people were asking him about his philosophy. They wanted to know what drove him, what made him wake up every morning and take on the enormous tasks he had set for himself. Musk, ever the visionary, gave simple yet profound answers. "I think the purpose of wealth is to create. It's to push boundaries, to make the impossible possible. Wealth shouldn't be something you hoard or use to distance yourself from others. It should be a tool that helps us all grow, progress, and achieve what we can't even imagine yet. For Musk, the goal had always been clear. Space, energy, and technology, those were the frontiers he was working to shape. But now, he saw that his impact wasn't just going to be limited to rockets and electric cars. He had, unintentionally, created a movement. He had opened a door for people to see wealth differently. It wasn't about opulence. It was about potential to solve humanity's biggest challenges. As the days wore on, it became clear that the conversation was far from over. The initial shock of Musk's words had given way to a deeper reflection on how we view wealth and purpose. David Grant, who had asked the question that started it all, received messages from people across the world, thanking him for sparking this new dialogue. One morning, David received a message from Musk himself, a simple text that read, "Thank you for asking the right question. The world needs more of that." David's eyes welled up. He had never imagined that asking a simple question would lead to something so profound. And for Musk, the encounter had reaffirmed his belief that sometimes the most important moments come not from speeches or grand ideas, but from simple, honest conversations. Elon Musk had shifted the conversation about wealth, and in doing so, he had shown the world that wealth, at its core, wasn't about accumulating money. It was about creating opportunities for others. It was about using what you have to make the world a better place. Days turned into weeks, and the conversation around Elon Musk's response continued to unfold globally. It wasn't just tech enthusiasts or business tycoons who were caught up in the debate. Regular people, the ones who felt the weight of society's financial inequalities every day, were now questioning the very foundation of what it meant to be rich. Elon Musk's comments had ignited a wave of introspection across multiple sectors. The global media had picked up the story, but it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about a shift in perspective, a newfound focus on wealth as a tool for progress, not just personal gain. David Grant, the man who had asked the question, had been thrust into the spotlight. His life, once filled with the quiet grind of working in a mechanic shop, had transformed into a whirlwind of interviews, discussions, and debates about his encounter with Musk. The world was listening to his words, and suddenly he had a platform to share his own journey, one that resonated with millions of others who were just like him, struggling, questioning, and searching for meaning in a system that often seemed to leave them behind. But it wasn't just David Grant's newfound voice that made a difference. There was a collective awakening happening. People began questioning the way wealth was distributed, what it was used for, and how it could be better utilized to serve humanity. The discussion moved beyond Musk and into the world at large, a world that had long been obsessed with accumulation but had never really considered what wealth could do for others. For Musk, the conversation didn't end after his brief interaction with David. In fact, it had become a significant turning point in his own life. He was often asked to elaborate on his philosophy regarding wealth, and each time, his responses became even more candid and insightful. "Wealth is a tool," he explained in one of his public interviews. "It's not the goal. It's not about living in a mansion or driving a fancy car. It's about using your position to help others, to move humanity forward. If you're not doing that, then what's the point of it all?" His words were gaining traction, especially among younger generations, those who were disillusioned with the corporate world's greed and the ever-growing divide between the rich and the poor. Musk's response to the stranger had sparked a movement, even though he never intended it to. But the ripple effect wasn't limited to the public sphere. Private discussions between business leaders, philanthropists, and investors began to shift. There was talk about changing corporate responsibility, investing in sustainable technologies, and ensuring that wealth was being distributed more equitably. Though many of these conversations were still in their infancy, Musk's influence was undeniable. He had redefined the conversation on wealth. Several months passed, and as Musk's $800 billion fortune continued to grow, the focus on his wealth remained a topic of great interest. He found himself once again on the receiving end of a question about his wealth. This time, though, the conversation had shifted. The question wasn't, "How much do you have?" but instead, "What are you doing with it?" One particularly poignant interview caught the public's attention. Musk was seated in front of a live audience of global leaders in a World Economic Summit, where he was being asked about his next big move. He leaned forward, his hands resting on the podium as he prepared to respond. "I'm not in the business of making money for money's sake," Musk began. "I'm here because I want to see humanity reach its potential. I want to see our species become a multiplanetary species, to see clean energy solutions adopted globally. The future is about our collective survival. That's what I'm doing with my wealth. That's what matters." The audience sat in captivated silence, many of them nodding in agreement. Musk wasn't just a businessman or a visionary. He was laying out a roadmap for how wealth could fuel the future of mankind. His answer wasn't about flaunting luxury, but about creating opportunities for all. Meanwhile, David Grant, who had started the conversation with a simple question, had been living a life that was entirely different from the one he had a year ago. His mechanic shop was now thriving, thanks to a combination of business advice from some of Musk's mentors and the newfound attention his story had brought him. But the biggest change was his mindset. David had started to think differently about his own wealth and success. When he first met Musk, he had been struggling, focused solely on survival. But now, he was thinking about what he could do for others, what he could build with the resources at his disposal. David became involved in local community projects aimed at providing resources for struggling families, and he began mentoring younger people who were interested in the trades. He had learned that wealth wasn't just about accumulation, it was about creating a cycle of positive change. David's story had spread, and it became a powerful narrative, a man who had been struggling on the streets, asking the right question, and then using the lessons learned to make a difference. His journey wasn't about money, it was about purpose, something that had deeply resonated with people across the globe. As time passed, the world began to recognize the impact of that one question. Elon Musk and David Grant had unknowingly sparked a conversation that reached beyond their initial encounter. The notion of wealth as a tool for progress had gained momentum, influencing everything from business practices to philanthropy, and even shifting policy decisions in governments around the world. Musk's influence continued to grow, but it was never about the money. It was always about what could be achieved with it. The true legacy was the idea that wealth could be harnessed for greater good, and it could empower others to build something better. And as for David Grant, his life had completely changed, not because of a financial windfall, but because of the opportunity to see wealth as a means to an end, to use it as a tool to lift others up. His question to Musk had opened a door, and it was a door that led to a new way of thinking for millions of people.